Hi, everybody. This is actually so much better for me. I was like the last speaker on the last panel, the last session of the conference. Like, how terrible is that? So, thanks for making this work for me. It's a pleasure to be here. In my presentation today, I'm going to be talking about the benefits of complete streets, with a particular focus on the metrics that we used to evaluate the Bloor bike lane in Toronto, which was installed as a pilot in August 2016 and made permanent in October 2017. So we often have really ambitious goals for what we hope that Complete Streets projects will achieve, and often more than we have funding to actually look at all of the things that we want to look at. But the bar is often set really high for these projects, more than we would set for kind of typical transportation projects. So at TCAT, we decided to develop this evaluation framework to assess the effectiveness of Complete Streets projects according to the four key goals that we see that they are trying to achieve. So the first is that we hope that we're going to see more walking and cycling. Secondly, we expected them to be safer and that that we will see fewer injuries and fatalities. And thirdly is this idea of level of service. And for those of you in the transportation field, this is typically around motor vehicle delay. But we're really interested in what does that look like? What does the transportation experience look like for people who are walking, cycling, and taking transit? And then fourthly, we have all these huge goals around, improved air quality and better health, reduced incidence of diabetes and obesity. And then finally, we also hope that Complete Streets will result in a better economic benefit for the local businesses. So this is something that we've really dug in and looked at TCAT over the past 10 years. We've done 3 studies now, and the first one was in 2009, and we looked at a section of Bloor Street in Toronto. Long story short is that we found that the majority of people were not driving to Bloor Street. There only about 10% were driving, and people who were walking and cycling were coming the most often and spending the most money. And at the time, that was really it was a bit of an unusual study. There hadn't been many like it before, and many people were surprised and skeptical, frankly, of the results. We were also surprised, actually, that there were so few people driving to those stores, given how much the business owners were feeling that they were relying on those parking spaces in front of their stores. So we actually replicated this study the next year in a slightly different part of Bloor Street to see if we came up with similar results, which we did more or less. And then that took us to 2015, when the city was actually going to be putting in a bike lane on Bloor on a temporary basis, but didn't have any plans to look at the economic impact at the time. So the 2 BIAs in the area approached us and said, we're interested, we know you've done these types of studies, so we'd like to see what actually changes as a result of the business of the bike lane going in or removing up to 160 parking spots. Then the Metcalfe Foundation came in and they were matched the funding from the BIAs, and subsequently the City of Toronto came in as a funder. So what did we do? We looked at 4 different metrics to evaluate economic impact. So we did a survey of merchants. We asked them how many customers were coming into their store, both before and after the bike lane. We did a visitor survey to understand how much people were spending and how often they were coming. And we also did a street level scan to understand if the vacancy rate was changing. So in terms of reported visitor spending, it went up on both Bloor and Danforth, and the Danforth was our control site at similar rates. And we saw increases were across nearly all transportation modes. But again, as we had found in our previous studies, people who walked or cycled reported the highest monthly spending. In terms of customer counts, they also increased. The number of businesses who reported 100 customers or more per day grew, and the number that saw 25 customers or less decreased. Visitor frequency, we looked at that as well. The visitors reported visiting more days per month, and increases were seen across all transportation choices. In terms of the vacancies, we did a street level scan, as I mentioned. They remained fairly stable. The vacancy rates remained fairly stable on Bloor. They actually decreased on the Danforth, but became more similar to the rate on Bloor. So in addition to our study, the City of Toronto undertook an extensive evaluation process to measure the impact of the pilot project. It is actually the most comprehensive performance evaluation undertaken by the city for a cycling project to date. So they focused on 5 key measures. The first was safety, which I'll talk about a little bit more in a minute. Secondly, the effects on business. So in addition to our study, they also purchased Monera's point of sale data to understand the sales. And then they also looked at the cycling environment. They found that the cycling volumes were up by 50%. They also did a preference survey to find out how people felt about the cycling environment. They also surveyed drivers, found that motor vehicle volume counts were down actually slightly, and motor vehicle travel time was up slightly, between 2 to 4 minutes. And it was a huge public perception effort. They did online surveys, stakeholder engagement, lots and lots of public meetings. And at the end, when it came to council, there were about 70 deputants. Virtually all of them were talked in favor. But it was still, nonetheless, a very heated debate that went on for hours. But at the end, it was overwhelmingly in favor. So about the safety, from the survey results that the city did, they found that 75% agreed that cycling on Bloor is safer now, and 85% of cyclists feel safe now compared to 3% before. And interestingly as well, motorists also expressed that they felt more comfortable driving next to cyclists now, and only 14% did before. In terms of actual safety, and it's interesting, Linda in a previous session was talking about trying to match timelines between what researchers want to do and what the city wants to do. And in this case, the timeline was very short for evaluating the project. So with less than 1 year of after collision data available, the city looked at the safety in a different way, and they used a conflict analysis. So that from there they found that most of the near-miss conflicts had decreased, with the exception of the conflicts between bikes and pedestrians, which actually was quite a big bump that they are hoping to mitigate with changing the design. So kind of returning to those 4 goals then that Complete Streets are aiming to achieve. So for the Bloor Street bike lane, we saw that there was progress on all 4 of these major goals, especially in terms of increasing the numbers of people cycling, in terms of safety, in terms of people feeling like it was more comfortable, and in terms of the positive economic impact for local business. So I mentioned earlier that this was the Bloor Street was the most extensive evaluation that the city had ever conducted. And in this session where we're talking about the need for more data, and I'm all for more data, but at the end of the day, it's when we're talking about putting in a facility to make it safer for people to get from point A to point B, ideally that should be all the evidence that we really need in order to move forward. So personally, I would love to see the day where we can put in protected bike lanes on main streets where they're needed, without so much divisiveness and without so much debate, in the same way that we would put in safety features like seatbelts or airbags in other instances. So anyway, just to conclude, we find that there are multiple benefits of complete streets, but the safety benefits should be hopefully all the evidence we need.